Brave New World. Thanks. I hate it. Salutations. I'm Becca, and this is Words and Other Malarkey. Welcome to Lessons from My Bookshelf, where I'm going through all the books in my home library and talking about what I've learned from them. And today is Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. I don't want to talk about this book. It's not even that bad. Really, the problem is that this is a literary book. This is the kind of book you read in high school and college for your English classes, and you talk about the themes and write an essay on it. This is the kind of book you're supposed to think about, and I don't want to think about books. So it's really hard. I don't know what I'm gonna say. I'm gonna try to make this somewhat intelligent, but I'm just gonna talk and we'll see what happens. So I have this paperback copy that I got for free because this professor or retired professor from my college was just giving away boxes of old books. He would just leave them in the English major building, the English department, I suppose, and we would all rifle through them and take things we thought were interesting. So I took this one, and it sat on my shelf for a few years, because I was like, oh, this is like a classic dystopian sci-fi. I should read this one day. So I finally have. Do I regret it? No, but also yes, because this was a professor's copy. It has notes in it, and I thought it would have helpful notes in the margins, explaining things. No, all it has is underlined in pencil, and then he wrote in the margins anytime a character is introduced. And then occasionally a definition of a word that they use in this book. Anyways, not very helpful, but how helpful would it have been anyway? So for those of you that don't know, Brave New World was written in 1932, so around the Great Depression era, right after, well, not right after, but between the world wars. So there was a lot going on historically. That's kind of the backdrop for what Huxley kind of had on his mind. He was very interested in technology and the way it was changing people and the future. So a lot of this book grapples with issues of technological and scientific advancements and how that can, theoretically alter society. Of course, is an extreme version, but in terms of the dystopian, genre, this is pretty foundational. It gets compared to 1984 by George Orwell a lot, and I haven't read that one yet, but I might have to now just for comparison's sake. I don't know. Here's a synopsis. We'll just get right into it. So this takes place in a world, they're about 500 years in the future, and what has happened is basically Fordism has become the structure of society, mass production and stuff. So humans are now mass produced in a factory. There are no families, there are no mothers and fathers, and that becomes really significant later. You start by touring a factory with this group of middle school age boys, and they're learning about how humans are made. They treat it like you're touring the freaking Hershey factory, and it's really disturbing and grotesque, but also fascinating, right? They have this process called hypnopedia. I think I'm saying that right. Don't quote me on that. Where it's sleep conditioning. So a lot of they do a lot of conditioning really early on. It's definitely the Pavlov stuff, based on a lot of that, and all sorts of psychology stuff. Yeah, and basically, they just play messages over and over while the kids are sleeping, just all throughout their childhood, so that they become conditioned to believe certain things and to like or dislike certain things, and then they associate, there's a scene where they put a bunch of babies in a room with some flowers, and then as soon as they touch the flowers, they like sound this really loud noise that makes them all cry, so that they learn not to like flowers, so that they don't like seek after beauty. Like, it's just, okay, yeah. The scenes are really like, you know, dystopic, and if you're into that, like, you'll love these scenes because they're so weird, and sometimes it's really off-putting, but in that way where you're just like, oh man, the future, you know. It's jarring, but also kind of humbling, I guess. Then you get introduced to the main characters. There's this guy named Bernard Marx, definitely not a subtle shout out to Karl Marx, if you know who that is, and he's different. Boo-hoo, but somebody's got to be different, otherwise we have no story. His problem is that he likes to be alone, and he isn't really interested in the things that other people his age are. So in this world, everybody's happy, you know, everybody's having a great time. It's all about like fulfilling your desires, like everything's very superficial. People don't get married. Sex is very like, there's no love in it. You just like do it with whoever, and there's no connection really. They all play a lot of golf, I guess. They have like different weird names for their games, and everything's very like stimulus oriented. Their movie theaters are like 5 senses interactive, kind of like VR, I guess. And they all take this drug called soma, which also becomes very significant later. And if you were in a English class, you would break down all the thematic elements, but here's what I do know. Soma is the Greek word for body, so it's pretty obvious. It's basically like a hallucinogen. It kind of like puts you in this like transcendent state where you're just like outside of reality, and you just get to like zone out and think about the universe for hours. And everybody takes it to basically get rid of any sort of like negative thought or negative situation that they deal with, so that there's no like internal conflict. Instead of dealing with their problems, they just take drugs. So it's all very like heavy-handed, but for significant reasons. Anyways, so you meet Bernard, and he's going out with this girl named Lenina, and they both work at the human factory. And he takes her on like a vacation to Santa Fe, New Mexico, to go tour the Savage Reservation. Listen, this book is it's kind of uncomfortably racist. It was just uncomfortable to read, and it's like that on purpose. Like, it's not unaware of what it's doing, but this society that they're in is like, there's this really heavily demarcated class system, and it's all like predetermined and engineered because society is all about order and about everybody knowing their rightful place. So there's alphas, betas, gammas, deltas, epsilons. Alphas are obviously at the top, epsilons are at the bottom, and usually anytime like a person that's not white is described, they're usually an epsilon. You can analyze that to your heart's content, but I think Huxley knew what he was doing from a social commentary perspective. But the Indian reservation that they go, it's like an actual Indian reservation, but they treat it kind of like a zoo. Like, it's just something that you go see just for the entertainment value, I guess. But like, they go into the reservation and just like watch the, you know, ceremonies and stuff. And it is like a group of people that are actually living that like ancient lifestyle. Like, they've just preserved this tribe, and it's kind of hinted out later that like these were societies that couldn't be civilized or modernized, so they just kind of like left them to do their own thing. I don't know, whatever. But when they're there, they meet this white guy named John, who was raised on the reservation, and his mother was from their society, which is London, though it's implied that like it's like a world state and all of the cities are basically the same structure with the hierarchy and whatnot. So his mother got lost in the Santa Fe desert and got saved by the Native Americans, and she had somehow gotten pregnant. Now, you're not supposed to get pregnant. Getting pregnant is like really taboo in their society. Mothers and fathers are taboo. basically anything having to do with like normal procreation is taboo. So she doesn't know how she got pregnant, but she did, and so she has her son, and he's raised. But he, of course, gets taught how to read and English and all that. Then he gets a hold of a volume of Shakespeare's collected works, since anybody related to English studies is haunted by Shakespeare. Shakespeare had to figure in there somewhere, so now he's all educated and stuff. So they take him back to London with them, and he becomes like an instant celebrity, and Bernard's super excited because he was a nobody, and now everybody wants to be his friend because he's friends with what they call in the book the Savage. I'm just going to call him John because I like that better. So he kind of gets like 15 minutes of fame, but people still think he's weird. And then John starts to see pretty quickly that the world, this like perfect world that his mom used to describe, is not perfect at all. It's really fucked up. And because he was from the outside, he sees it really clearly. He falls in love with Lenina, but his moral code that he's kind of instilled in himself via Shakespeare and also like the Native American culture doesn't let him have sex unless he's married. So he wants to marry Lenina, but she has no concept of marriage. They don't do marriage in their society. So he kind of like goes a little nuts, I guess. So he gets into some shenanigans, trying to like break people free of the system, and it doesn't work because they're all conditioned to love their society. And he ends up, like, here's the thing, this book is like not really supposed to be funny, but it has these like really nice darkly comedic moments, and I'm all for dark comedy. So what happens is, so his mom came back with him, and she was just like, oh, I just want to go home and take some Soma and go to sleep. So she just takes Soma until she dies. And so, he has like a really normal concept of death, whereas everybody in the society is conditioned to just accept death as not something to be upset about at all, because they don't do like personal attachment. So he's there, there's a bunch of kids running around, he gets really pissed. He goes downstairs to where like all the like deltas or epsilons or whatever the heck they are filing out, and like basically starts like a brawl. He's just like trying to like rally them into fighting for their freedom, and they don't understand because they're engineered not to understand. So then Bernard and another character that's like kind of different too show up, and they all get taken to the like world leader, and the world leader, who is like, because this is how world leaders tend to be in these sorts of books, very much aware of the society he's in, but is also in charge of keeping it orderly. But it's one of those like weird paradoxes where those that are in charge know the things that everybody else can't, and he like explains to John why everything is the way it is and why he can't like inspire these people to freedom. Bernard and the other guy, Helmholtz, gets sent to an island where they are free to be individuals, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then John's like, ooh, can I go? And the world leader is like, no, you can't. You're going to stay here, and we're going to continue this little experiment. And so John like goes and lives in a lighthouse and tries to just garden and live out his life in peace, because he can't reconcile like this society with what he believes. But people start kind of spying on him, and he also like just, I don't know, he does a lot of weird things. Like he feels the need to punish himself, which I could try to get into, I guess, but that feels like something you just have to analyze in a classroom setting, and we're not here to analyze. And he starts like whipping himself, and people think it's funny, so they go and watch him. And then they start, spoilers, I guess, I'm just going till the end apparently. They start like this, I told you I didn't want to talk about this book. So in their like society, they do this like religious ceremony. It's basically just an orgy. And like, okay, I knew the going in, I knew about the orgy thing, and that was it, because of course that's the only thing that like someone my age would mention is, oh yeah, they have orgies. But it's, you know, symbolically significant, I guess. So in the end, they like start having an orgy, and I guess he gets involved. It's unclear, but when I looked up the Spark Notes, it said something about that, so I'm just gonna roll with it. And then he's like so ashamed of himself that he hangs himself the next day. So yeah, that's Brave New World. Spoilers, sorry. You know, whenever you read a book that you know has a lot to unpack, but you're not there to unpack it, how exactly do you read it? I mean, on the one hand, I kind of read it for entertainment, but it's not really meant to be entertaining. It does have its moments. It's a pretty digestible. The language is not, you know, overly complex or anything, but the ideas are like complex enough to where it's probably worth it to stop and think about what you're reading. But I didn't do that because I was just trying to finish the darn thing. But I mean, it did make me think. It's interesting reading this almost 100 years after it was written, and it's kind of disturbing almost how in some ways this book was a little prophetic. Some of the ways that we've become so dependent on technology are definitely foreshadowed in this book. I guess the way people like live for their pleasures. Honestly, if I could, I would just read or keep the foreword of this book, which was written by Aldous Huxley in 1946 for like the new edition, because the foreword is really amazing. And he kind of even says, like, he talks about what he would do differently if he was writing it now. You know, this is like either in the middle of or kind of towards the end of World War II, right? So like he talks about what he would have done differently if he was writing it now. And he talks about like exactly what he was thinking in terms of what it would take for a society to gain full control of people. And it really kind of hit a little too close to home. If you ever get a hold of Brave New World, try to find one with like the 1946 foreword, because it's really interesting. So let's talk about the entertainment value. Is there any? You don't read this book to be entertained. I mean, I suppose you could. There were like entertaining parts. Like I said before, there were like some darkly comedic parts to it. The characters were kind of interesting, even as far as like they don't have the happiest endings, especially not the one you kind of root for the most. But, you know, this book is kind of designed to make you uncomfortable. So if like that's your jam and you like to read things that make you uncomfortable and make you think, I mean, then definitely read Brave New World. Read it if you like dystopian and you like to think and like to be a little uncomfortable, but in ways that are intentional. Extremely well written, of course. It's a classic, so it's gotta be. There were some plot things that like I personally didn't like, and I feel like it was just a preference, because once again, this is in, I would say, in the literary genre, even though it's like sci-fi. So like you can't really like apply the conventions of sci-fi to it. But like, for example, they had like this island, you know, that I said they sent Bernard and Helmholtz to at the end, and they're like, yeah, the world controller guy is basically just like, good thing there's a lot of islands in the world, otherwise we'd have to kill ya. And it's kind of like an elegant solution on the one hand, because it's like, if you can't conform to our society and you just gotta be an individual, we're gonna send you to an island where you can be an individual until you die. And apparently like that solves their problem. The other thing that bothered me, I guess, was like, why a Native American reservation, aside from the fact that it's just such a stark contrast to their society. Like what I was expecting, and this is going in with basically no knowledge of the book, was for them to go visit a like savage reservation and it just be like people like us, like from like the early 1900s living their lives. That's an entirely different book though. So I feel like for me that's like just a weird me thing that like I would like to see, and I'm sure there's a book about it somewhere. Him choosing to have this be a Native American reservation where they're using these ancient rituals in like this totally dynamically different society from, you know, this Brave New World is very much intentional, and I'm sure there's all sorts of literary reasons that you can ascribe to it, but I'm not going to because I don't want to. All I know is that it would be interesting, and again, I'm sure this exists, to see a book where the society in the book goes back and treats modern society like antiquity. Again, it would be a totally different book with pretty different things to say. So, yeah, whatever. So, for next time, I've really kind of screwed myself over with this. Because I happen to own the Alexander Hamilton biography, the one that the hit Broadway musical Hamilton was inspired by. I absolutely love Hamilton, even though I've never seen it live. I've just listened to the soundtrack a million times. But I have owned this for a long time. I think I got it from my grandfather, and good Lord, 700 pages. So I'm giving myself a lot of time to read this, like 2 weeks. So yeah, there won't be another one of these videos for a little while, and I'm okay with that, and I don't think anybody's gonna miss me. Wah wah. World's tiniest violin over here. Well, until then, keep it weird, and don't conform to society. Just screw. Done.